in the spirit of the Travelogue series, I'm going to tell you a bit about the sort of potential for tourism interests in and around Colombia, which is one of my favorite cities or countries to visit in the world. I've been there 6 or 7 times, and I think I'm going to cover 11 regions in this presentation, and there are far more that I don't cover, but for the sake of time, I just picked my top 11. But out of these, I've only been to 6 or 7, and the others I've just done some relatively extensive research on. So I will note in the slides if I haven't been to a place, and then I'm using stock photos. But otherwise, most of the photos should be my own. And if you have any questions about that at any point, at the end or whatever, I can extrapolate more. Okay, so on the left, you'll see the general map of where Colombia is. It's the only country in South America with both an Atlantic and a Pacific coast. And yeah, it has 3 spines of the Andes. You can kind of see that on the map on the right, the Western, Central, and Eastern. So there's tons of peaks and valleys all throughout the country. Often to the distant east is sort of their Great Plains. I'll talk about that quite a bit too. And then in the south, of course, I think it's a full third of the land area of the country is considered Amazon. And then they have some, you can also, if you avert back to the map on the left, you can see they've got a couple far-flung small Caribbean islands. We'll talk about those as well. So I think this is the order we're going to go in. We're going to cover the capital, Bogotá, the city of Cali, the Caribbean coast, generally speaking, the city of Medellin, the Zona Cafetera, which is the major coffee producing area, the Pacific coast, the Amazon, the Llanos, the plains out in the east, El Cocuy National Park, La Guajira, which is this desertic peninsula. This is the northern tip of the South American continent. And then last but not least, San Andrés and Providencia, which are the Caribbean islands, which are actually much closer to Nicaragua. We will be going through, I'll start with a bit of the logistics about how to get to Colombia generally. Then we'll go through all those regions. I'll touch a bit on the food, some general costs associated, and then some brief comments on safety, and then the COVID situation. I'm giving this audience, of course, or I'm giving this presentation, of course, for a Chicago audience. So things like costs and logistics and all that will be geared towards that. But if you're in another city or another country, we can maybe talk about how to think about it in your terms. In terms of logistics from the US, from Chicago, typically you'll fly either into Bogota or Cartagena. Those are generally the cheapest flights, the most direct flights. And once you're in the country, unless you're going to Medellin or Cali, they'll be the best jumping off points. Secondarily, if your destination is Medellin or Cali, there are also flights. Typically, there's Copa flights from Chicago to Panama City, and then onward, I think, to any of these destinations, or American Airlines from Miami, and Spirit from Fort Lauderdale. I think 1 or 2 airlines from Mexico City. Those are the bulk of the options. And I would say, generally speaking, from Chicago to Bogota, depending on the time of the year and the days of the week, you can look towards spending anything from $250 to $500 or even $600. Maybe more during Christmas and New Year's, but in the off season, certainly you can get them for pretty cheap. Once you're in Colombia, they don't have much in the way of a rail network or anything like that. So you're up for long bus rides or short plane rides. I don't necessarily recommend driving if you're used to American roadways. It's a lot of mountainous switchbacks and overtaking on narrow roads. So I don't recommend driving unless that's sort of your thing. Taxis are pretty cheap and plentiful. There's an app there called Cabify. Uber at this point might have gotten booted out. They were around for a while, but the taxi unions were very unfriendly towards them, and you had to sit in the front seat and pretend like it was your buddy picking you up. Otherwise, there might be some trouble. So Cabify, though, if I understand correctly, is totally legit, and it's basically an Uber clone, but for Colombia. And then if you're into cycling at all, the bicycling culture in Colombia is very robust. They've got a strong bicycling contingent, leading all the way up to professional sports, and lots of infrastructure in place for that. So you could bike potentially from city to city or around these various routes. Okay, so starting a bit with Bogota, I've got this handy little map on the bottom left whenever we start one of these regional sections, and then some cultural photos. So Bogota is the capital. The city itself has a population of 7 million, but it's much larger than that in the metro area. The modern-ish city of Bogota was founded by the Spanish in 1538. The name was taken from the indigenous, I think it was Bacata, which is the name of the river. The indigenous people who lived here, and they're still around, they're called the Muisca people. And Bogota itself is very high up, and it's actually got a cold, rainy climate, which is something you'll see a lot in Colombia. You'll think in terms of, well, it's a tropical country near the equator, but when you think about all those mountains rising up, you'll get a lot of variations in climate, and Bogota is not necessarily the most pleasant weather. It rains off and on throughout the day. I would consider it closer to what you would get in, say, Scotland in terms of weather, although it doesn't get quite that cold. I think it usually bottoms out in the 50s or so. These photos on the right you can see are from sort of the original colonial quarter of Bogota, which is called La Candelaria. This is a very touristic place. Lots of museums, lots of old-timey architecture, lots of street art, as you can see on the very right. And a lot of walking tours take place there. This is also the hub of sort of the hostel area, Colombia. Part of the reason I think it's an interesting place now is because it's been for a while now an up and coming sort of backpacker destination. So if you think about tourism in terms of stages of gentrification, it's in the phase where the artists and the hippies move in. And La Candelaria is sort of the epicenter of that in Bogota and maybe even the country. It is, however, not necessarily the safest neighborhood. I don't like to be negative about things in terms of safety, but it isn't the place I would send someone if they were very sensitive to that sort of thing. There is poverty on display in the neighborhood, and you do need to take precautions like walking around at night and stuff, thinking twice, which again we can get into a bit more later. This is also near in the Candelaria. This is the Plaza Bolivar, which is the central plaza where I believe Congress and I think the presidential palace is here too. It might be a couple blocks away, but this is sort of the central plaza where if there's going to be a demonstration taking place or a big cultural festival, usually it'll happen here. This photo is facing eastward, and you can see the mountains rising in the background. Actually, I like to think in Bogota in terms of similar geographic layout to Chicago, in that it stretches mostly from north to south. Whereas in Chicago, the lake stops the city encroachment. In Bogota, that mountain does. So if you zoom in on it on like Google Maps or something, you'll see that the development stops in its tracks right at that mountain, and that the sprawl happens to the northwest, southwest. Similarly, in terms of economic demographics in Bogota, the north side, generally speaking, is the more affluent, and the south side is the less affluent. Like I said, Bogota has a strong street art culture. You can take free walking tours of There's many famous murals all around the city. A lot of it is political in nature. A lot of it is left-leaning politics in nature. And you'll see things all around the city. Of course, this is a commentary on, the sort of capitalist neoliberal structure of the rich people being saddled on the poor while they sort of yearn to break free. You also see the anti-fascist graffiti in the bottom right. There is a free walking tour if you Google Bogota free graffiti walking tour. I think they do it for tips, and I would highly recommend it. So just on the other side of those mountains in Bogota, there's what's called the this is the national park called, oh, I'm blanking. I should have wrote it down. So there's 2 or 3 national parks surrounding Bogota. I'm looking this up as I speak, and this one is called Chingaza. And these are these sorts of highland wetlands that they're not quite cold enough to get snow, but they're not warm enough to be warm. As you can see, we're all wearing jackets here hiking around. And this is the natural reservoir for Bogota. Bogota needs very little in terms of water treatment, and it's very healthy in terms of its ability to get water to the people, because this is such a lush, rainy area just above the mountains, and then it's minimally processed and then fed to the people. You can actually drink water from the faucet as long as the pipes are clean in whatever structure you're in. You can drink water straight from the faucet in Bogota. It's not a problem. This area, when the Spanish arrived, the Muisca people had a ceremony where they would have gold trinkets that they would toss into these lakes. And when the Spanish observed this, they thought to themselves, well, these people have so much gold, they could just toss into lakes. There must be quite a lot of gold around here. Of course, what they didn't realize is there's not a lot of gold necessarily right around here. It was done as a matter of supply chain trading with other indigenous folks in the region. But when the Spanish violently asked the Muiscas, give us all your gold, where's the rest of it? The Muiscas cleverly sent them on a wild goose chase to the fabled El Dorado, city of gold, which of course doesn't actually exist. So the legend of El Dorado was born in these mountains as a trick to get the Spanish to leave them alone, I think, for a few more decades as they set off into whatever direction they did to find El Dorado. Right, moving on from Bogota, the city of Cali. This is in the near the southwest of the country. It's sort of considered a Pacifico. It's in the the foothills of the Western Cordillera of the Andes. It's the 3rd largest city in the country, so it's Chicago-esque in that way, I suppose, and it's the capital of salsa in Colombia. If you are going to come to Cali, for among other reasons, the principal ones would be to learn salsa, and it's a very popular place to come in Colombia to learn Spanish. I should mention too that Colombian Spanish is very famous for being among the clearest of all the Spanish-speaking countries. They've got one among the most neutral accents. That's generally speaking too, because if you talk to somebody from Medellin, they're a little out there, and then Bogota has its own accent as well. But it would be considered something like newscaster accent, like the clearest as far as the entire region of Latin America is considered. Cali being in the foothills, it is in the mountains, but it is much lower in altitude, so it has a much more humid tropical climate. And in fact, the city sprawls up into these hills. You can see that they're all green. There's not too much snow cap here. It is a highly developed city, but it is also known for not necessarily being the safest city. And again, I say that sort of hesitantly because I don't like discouraging people, but just to be aware of that. And I won't touch too much on this now, but if you've been keeping up with the news, Colombia is going through some political strife right now as a backlash to some government measures that, if you ask me, aren't really the wisest thing. Cali is a big epicenter of that. A lot of university students, there's a big university here, And then indigenous folks have been coming in from the outskirts and voicing their concerns with the government. So in this moment, Cali's a little more popping off than usual. But as you can see, it's a very beautiful city. They're also, if I'm not mistaken, Cali is also very well known for their flowers. Colombia is actually the number one, if I'm not mistaken, the number one or number two exporter of flowers in the world. And I think the number one to the US after the Netherlands. When you fly into Bogotá, you can actually see all the flower greenhouses that sprawl out into the savannah. Okay, jumping up to the Caribbean coast. This is a very blanket term because of course, the Caribbean coast is long, but culturally speaking, the sort of Caribe coast would go from slightly south of Cartagena all the way up to near the desert of the Guajira. The principal cities here are Cartagena, Santa Marta, also Barranquilla, which is a port city. That's where the annual Carnival is. Santa Marta is, if I'm not mistaken, the first European settled city on the South American continent, or maybe it's the oldest surviving. It's also the resting place of Simon Bolivar, which being very general, he was sort of the George Washington of South America. He liberated them from the Spanish to start an independent life. It's hot and humid basically everywhere except for the highest reaches of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta mountain range, which is the tallest coastal mountain range in the world, and it's also separate from the Andes. You can sort of see it in that map. It's my little red line goes right through it on the top right of the line. It's pretty interesting. A really, really high peak there called Pico Cristobal Colon, Peak Christopher Columbus. But for the most part, the area is hot and humid. Lowland stretches out right into the sea. On the right here, this is one of my favorite things I've ever done in Colombia, which is the 4-day hike to the Ciudad Perdida, which means lost city. So this is a lost city of the Terrona people, who have made up of 3 different tribes or nations, the Wiwa, the Kogi, and unfortunately I'm forgetting the third. But these people are still all over the place. They were never vanquished by the conquistadors, and they've opened up this archaeological site for tourists to come. The only way to get here is a 4-day trek through the mountains. You can't get here any other way, so it does take some dedication, and it is very, very difficult. So you have to be in good physical shape. The trek itself is incredible. You go through the jungle, you're twisting and turning up and down mountains, stopping in super cold rivers to cool off, and then camping in these outcrops. The culmination is this archaeological site, which is 1,000 or so years older than Machu Picchu. I don't think I haven't been to Machu Picchu, but I don't think it's quite as spectacular a site in and of itself. But the journey itself, I think, is very comparable in terms of how incredible it is. And then, of course, there's Cartagena. Cartagena was a very, very rich city back in the 16th century. The Spanish used it to extract all the natural resources from the mountains and then ship them off to Spain. There's this beautiful Spanish colonial architecture, similar to what you'd see in New Orleans. And the whole city is surrounded by still surrounded by the original walls. It was a walled fortification because I believe it was sacked or attempted to be sacked many, many times by English, Dutch, and pirates and various other things. So you can today walk along the original walls with the original cannons and enjoy a beer and watch the sunset. It's very hot. It's also, if you've ever read the book Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that takes place in a fictional city that's sort of an amalgamation of Cartagena and Barranquilla. Another famous site, and there's too many to list, so I'm not getting to them all. But this is Tayrona National Park, which is on the coast near Santa Marta. It's these beautiful sprawling beaches with these big boulders. And then there's some archaeological sites there in the forest as well. Sorry for the blurriness of this photo. This is before I had a decent camera. So I opted to go with personal photos instead of open range ones if I could, even to my detriment of them being a bit blurry. But this is a very crowded and popular place. So if that's not your thing, if you're looking for secluded beaches, go elsewhere. But if you're looking for just beautiful beaches and you don't mind the crowds, then this is the place for you. It is still in some political capacity indigenous territory. So 1 month each year, the Tayrona people will close it down and allow it to rejuvenate. So if you're making this sort of your focal point of the trip, be sure to look into the schedule for that. And this is just another shot from the hike to Ciudad Perdida. You have to do it. It's compulsory to do it with the guide. The only option is these group tours, and there's only 4 or 5 operations. By legal mandate, they all charge the same. I think the 4-night trip for us, we did it back in 2015. So back then it was something like $230 a person, and that included all the lodging, all the meals, the guide, and pretty much everything for 4 nights. I don't know. I'm sure they've raised the price since then, but I think it's not like exponentially, so it's still pretty affordable. This is walking up the ancient staircase to get to sort of the archaeological site at the peak. All right, Medellin, second largest city. This city is winning all kinds of awards for being modern and forward thinking and all these things. It is really experiencing sort of a like cultural renaissance right now. Obviously, if you've ever heard of this city, you've probably heard of it because of what was going on in the 80s and 90s. They're really trying to shed that image and make it a cool and safe city. So this is also a very popular city with like the digital nomad crowd, people who work remotely and want to just live in another city for some time. And it's also it's described as a city with perfect weather year round. It's the city of eternal spring, and it's in a valley where I think it's perpetually 72 degrees and there's only light rain once in a while. They also have this modern tram system, so you can get around the city very easily on public transportation. Not even Bogota has something like this, which if you bring that up to Rolo, they're really upset. So don't talk about it too much. This is a nice shot of the city as a whole. As you can see, there's a lot of sprawl. And yeah, you can do this parasailing thing over the city if you're into that sort of adventurous sport. I've never been to Medellin, so I don't have a ton to tell you about it. Also, right outside of Medellin, this isn't Medellin despite the label. There are a few day trips. So it's a good city for that as well. If you are living there as, say, a digital nomad, you can, get out of town for the weekend to one of these few. There's a few little towns like this. This one is called, what's it called? One second. Guatape, that's what it's called. I was blanking. So there's this huge rock that's in the middle of this very quaint and charming town called Guatape. And then all around in the town, there's a man-made reservoir. And it's stocked with trout, and you can get all these trout specials, and everybody loves the town and reports back that it's just beautiful and incredible. You can see that staircase. I think that's the only way to get to the top of that rock. So if you want that view, you have to put in the effort. Another one of those small towns outside of Medellin is called Jardín. Okay, moving along, we've got the coffee zone, the Zona Cafetera. This is a region, not just a city, but it's sort of located in between, as you can see on the map, Medellin, Bogotá, and Cali. So it's pretty accessible from all three of those. And then the coffee zone itself is flanked by three cities, Pereira, Armenia, and Manizales, which is another university city. In the Zona Cafetera, they're very well known, of course, for their coffee, which we've all probably drank at some point in our lives. There's also extensive, beautiful mountains here, most notably the Los Nevados National Park. I have been here, so these are my photos. And then these nice colonial villages. So you can pop from village to village and then go hiking for the day, go on a coffee tour. And then this tallest palm trees in the world, these wax palms, these are also very famous. They're in Cocora Valley, which is one of the most, I think, beautiful places in Colombia. This is it. It is quite touristy though, as you can see. We're walking and there's a big crowd of people. However, if you get outside of Cocora Valley even a little bit, you can ditch the crowds and get to mountains that look more like this. When my wife and I went here, we did a 3-day trek through the Los Nevados National Park and summited a volcano. And on the 2 or 3 nights we were here, we stayed on this farm called La Argentina that was right on the side of this beautiful mountain. The trekking is difficult, but I think it's the best I've ever done in the world. And I would highly recommend this if you're into trekking at all. This is descending from the volcano. I don't know if you can tell, but right at like 6 o'clock in this photo, you can see my wife and her backpack. And then if you look sort of where she seems to be looking, you can see our guide down there, guiding us down the side. It looked like we were on Mars. And then on the way, once you get past this ecosystem, you're back in that sort of like highland paramo sort of swamp ecosystem. And we actually got lost in that and almost missed the light. We had to like rush back to the farm because if we got stuck out past dark, there's no, we would have had to camp in the swamp, which isn't fun. Okay, this is the Pacific region. It's a totally different world than the Caribbean. Of course, Caribbean beaches are well known for being, the white sand, white fluffy sand, calm waves, and all of that. Here on the Pacific coast, a lot of it is black sand, and you'll get these big boulders, and it's pretty undeveloped. So in many places, the forest comes right up to the sea. This is one of the oldest rainforests on Earth. This is, I think, the wettest place on Earth, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of just raininess. And this is a totally separate rainforest than the Amazon, which formed much later on the other side of the Andes. So you'll get a lot of, I don't know if it's as biodiverse as the Amazon, but you'll get a lot of really old and weird species that don't exist anywhere else because this is an ecosystem unto itself. To get here, there's really 2 places as a tourist you would want to go, either Bahia Solano or the national park just outside of Buenaventura. If you're going to Bahia Solano, you have to fly from Medellin. That's the only choice. And then to get from Buenaventura, you would, I think you can fly, but it's probably cheaper just to get to Cali and then take the bus or a taxi. I think it's only a couple hours from there. And then there's all kinds of national parks and tourist sites, hotels, hostels, whatever your style is. And you can do all kinds of things. There's lots of ecotourism, there's lots of cultural tourism and sports. There's some scuba diving. Isa Gorgona near Buenaventura is an island off the coast that used to be a penal colony. But for whatever reason, they abandoned it. And now the prison is overgrown with jungle. So it's an interesting sort of archaeological site. And all around that island, there's some really great scuba diving, but you can only go out on liveaboard. And I think it's, there's only 3 or 5 day options. And then further up the coast nearby is Solano, there's whale watching. There is surfing. And there are super unique indigenous groups such as the Embera who you can visit in the forest, if that's of interest to you. The Pacific Coast too is historically, at least in the last few centuries, it was the site of a lot of maroon communities that's escaped slaves. So it is Afro-Colombian in demographics. Many of the Black people who escaped slavery tended to live here within and among the indigenous population. It's probably not a surprise too that it's also one of the poorest and most neglected regions in Colombia. The government's not too keen on, same old story all around the world, providing for the people. Okay, moving on from there, the Amazonas. The Amazon is obviously huge. Like it's basically, I mean, I don't know how accurate the Google map is, but like all that darker green shade halfway down Colombia and where that road ends is Amazon, whether transitional or like full on Amazon rainforest. So there's lots of different places in the Amazon you can visit as a tourist, but the principal one, the longest running one, is flying into Leticia, which is all the way down on the Amazon River itself, right at the tri-border of Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. I have been here, and it's a really, really incredible place. I've wanted to go to the Amazon since I was a little kid, and I was watching Discovery Channel. The jungle episodes were always my favorite. So when I finally got down here, it was sort of a life achievement unlocked. Obviously, it's super biodiverse. One of the things they don't really tell you, or you wouldn't assume about the Amazon, is spotting wildlife is actually hard. Go figure. There's a lot of hiding places because it's so densely forested that you don't actually see that much wildlife unless you're there with an experienced guide or you get lucky. So you're not going to run into tapirs or jaguars or anything like that. This monkey we see here, his name was Don Quixote. He's a howler monkey, and there is a site we visited down there called Maicuchiga. It means monkey story in the local Ticuna language, and they're a rehabilitation center for monkeys that were rescued from the illegal pet trade. Leticia being on the tri-border of those three countries and having the biggest airport right on that area, it's a popular place for folks to smuggle exotic animals out of the rainforest into wherever they're going. Whenever the people get caught with monkeys, they typically send them to Maicuchiga, where they're rehabilitated and let go. The nice thing about this place is none of these monkeys are caged at all. They're all welcome into the place, and they can choose to run off into the forest whenever they feel that they're ready. But many of the monkeys, monkeys are pretty smart, so they know they're not ready. And this place just sort of offers them a refuge and a family and food and shelter while they're, getting their confidence back and ready to run off into the forest. And then this bird is just, I would think it was a pet. We saw it outside some guy's house and he was squawking at me. There's a lot of different options for tourism here. There are some big destructive hotels that they built right on the river that run AC all day long. I don't want to get too political, but I don't really recommend those, like no matter how much you love AC, because this is just such a precarious environment, and I don't like contributing to that. When we went, and I'm not trying to be preachy here, but when we went, we opted to go to this place called Yoi Eco Tours, YOI, and this is an indigenous run organization that has 3 small cabins in the jungle. There's no electricity on the premises at all, so there's no AC, there's not even fans. Cold water showers, bugs everywhere, even in the room. So it's not for everyone, but I don't know. That's where I was at. And this is us walking around on the grounds. Obviously it's the rainforest, so it was raining in this picture. Among the other things we did, we visited an indigenous Ticuna community and hung out with them for a while. We went piranha fishing. Piranha fishing is the easiest thing in the world. You just dip a shiny hook into the water and they bite it. they're not as dangerous as like movies would have you believe. Like I think all those that old footage of piranhas like eating cows and stuff was a group of piranhas in a stagnated pool that were starved intentionally, and then they put the cow in there for like shock value. Regular piranhas. I mean, I swam in the Amazon, and you don't have to worry about it. But they're easy to catch. And then we ate a couple of the bigger ones, and they taste like any flaky white fish. This was the boat we used to get around. This was the Amazon during dry season. So I'm actually standing on an island in this photo. The Amazon River itself is miles across. So this is just like a very small section of it. It's much wider than this. We also visited a small town called Puerto Nariño, which is a small community that doesn't have any motor vehicles at all. It's just walking and bicycles. And we went night hiking in the jungle, which was, I think, my favorite part of the trip, because we saw all kinds of huge walking insects, frogs, snakes, spiders, you name it. And that's part of when you see the biodiversity of the region. A lot of it's going to be bugs. All right, moving on to Los Llanos. This is the Great Plains out in the east, as I mentioned. So you can compare this sort of to the Great Plains of the United States, in that it's got that like cowboy culture. It's a lot of guys on horses herding cows and stuff like that. It is also comparable, I think, to the Pantanal in Brazil, because even though it is a plain, it's also sort of a wetlands area, and it's sort of like going on. I haven't been here, to be clear. I've just done the research. It's sort of like going on safari. This is like the Amazon without the trees. I was just sort of noting that spotting wildlife in the Amazon is hard. Here, it's the opposite. It's quite easy, and they've got anacondas and tapirs and not nutria, but those other big rodents. And this is also a very, very renowned birding site in the world, because you're getting the migratory birds from the mountains, the jungle, and the ocean, all sort of culminating in this one region. And they're easy to spot because the trees aren't so dense. Whatever these are called, if somebody knows what those are, I forget the name of them. But as you can see, it's sort of like going on safari in East Africa, except you're getting the South American ecosystem. And then all the way on the east, you get these super bizarre hills. If anybody's seen the movie Embrace of the Serpent, this is where they filmed the bizarre and psychedelic ending to that. And if you haven't seen that movie, you should. These are the Cerros de Mavicure, I think, and they're right near the border of Venezuela. And here's a picture of a couple birds. As I said, it's a birding location. The Caribbean coast is a great birding location too. I should have noted that earlier. So this is a bit harder to get to, but I think it's more renowned by birders. But I think second place in Colombia would be the Caribbean coast near Tirana and the Santa Marta Mountains, the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. All right, El Cocuy, this one is a national park in the northeast near the border of Venezuela. The only way to get there, well, the main way to get there is, if you're a tourist, is from Bogotá, and it's via 12-hour bus ride. There's no airport or anything closer. It used to be the case that you could come here and do all the trails. Doing all the trails in the park would take 4 or 5 days, and you would camp in the park and you could go up past the snow line. However, back in, I want to say 2014 or 2015, the indigenous folks who consider this land sacred put up a bunch of roadblocks and protested and said these tourists are ruining the park. They're ruining not the park, but their land, because campers were coming in. They were messing with the snow line. They were messing with just like some taboo things you shouldn't do, and leaving behind a bunch of trash, not cleaning up after themselves. So it was closed for a couple of years completely, while the government negotiated with the indigenous folks. And then when they reopened now, you can only do day trips in the park. So you have to return to the park boundary every day and stay. There's some refugios or lodges like set up near the border. Certain parts of the park that used to be accessible are no longer accessible. I think you can technically no longer go past the snow line. Anyway, it's a very beautiful place, super glaciated. I haven't been here. I was supposed to go here in February 2020. We had the tickets to go and we were planning it. I had booked with a local guide and everything. Unfortunately, 2 days before we were set to leave Chicago, not 2 days, the day we were supposed to set to leave Chicago, a park ranger was killed by, I think it turned out to be an ELN, which is one of the guerrilla movements that was operating in the area and got spotted or something or other. I don't know the full story, but this is a somewhat contentious area, not just because of like the guerrilla activity, but also because there's a lot of I'm going to try to put this as neutrally as possible, but there's a lot of like basically government funded right-wing paramilitary movements that encroach into the area and do like secret looking for oil reserves. And if one is ever found, then, you know, bye-bye national park status, sort of that sort of thing. Generally speaking, it's safe for tourists. Like nobody wants to mess with the tourists because that means like, you know, the military is going to move in or something. But yeah, I mean, there's instances such as that where the park ranger was killed because he saw something he shouldn't have seen, and then they closed down the park completely. So I had to revamp my whole trip super last minute, which I'll tell you where we ended up going. But generally speaking, you would take the 12-hour bus to, this is El Cocuy, the actual town. It's very, very small, very laid back and slow moving. And you would do these day trips into the park. And I just think it's one of the most, or it looks to be one of the most beautiful places in Colombia with all the glaciers and the peaks. Yeah, look at this. I don't know if this picture was taken before the snow line thing was in effect, or if, I know you can still get past the snow line. Like if it snowed and the snow line went down, I think you can still go to a certain point. I just don't know. I wish I could tell you what that point was exactly. I think we have 2 left. All right, this is La Guajira. This is the desert in the northern tip of the country. That whole peninsula is desert right on the border of Venezuela, and it's got these really stark contrasts right up against the sea. These are the Wayuu people. This is an indigenous group, and I think they're the most populous single indigenous group in Colombia, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I wrote that down. Yeah, so it must be true. You can get there from, like, if you fly into Cartagena and you beelined it straight for the Guajira, it's probably like a 6-hour drive, or you can break it up by visiting like Barranquilla, Santa Marta, Tirona, these things. This is a popular like 2 or 3 day trip if you just want to pay like a group trip thing to bring you up here and see what's going on. You can do this from Santa Marta very easily. And I highly recommend, I recommended the movie Embrace of the Serpent a few minutes ago. That movie I highly recommend, that deals with sort of struggles of indigeneity in the Amazon. The same director, their follow-up movie was called Birds of Passage. And this is about sort of the capitalist corruption of indigenous culture in this region. And it's an absolutely beautiful movie, and I highly, highly recommend it. In Spanish, it's called Pájaros del Verano. And speaking of pájaros, here's some flamingos. Yeah, so there's like, again, it's like this vast, vast desert. There's a lot of oil, what's it called, extraction up here. Despite this, it will not surprise you, the indigenous people remain quite poor and destitute because, you know, despite their lands being leached, they don't get to reap much of the benefit. In fact, the opposite. But like I said, great for if you're into landscape photography, if you're into like learning more about unique indigenous cultures, or if you just want to go somewhere that, and say you've been somewhere that not a lot of folks from the US have been. This is a super interesting choice. That movie Birds of Passage opens with this dance. I'm not going to begin to describe it because I wouldn't do it justice, but Wayuu people have this sort of courtship dance that is just incredibly gorgeous. And they have these fabrics that they make, and I think you can buy them there. They're also famous for these bags that they make, like satchels. There's a better word for it that I'm not thinking of. You can take one home with you. All right, I think last but not least, San Andres and Providencia. So when we got our trip to El Cocuy, to the cold mountains, snatched away from us, we opted for the exact opposite. I wanted to go to Providencia for a long time. And I think it was mentioned in my brief intro in the beginning that I'm a big fan of scuba diving. This is some of the best diving this is the best diving I've ever done in the Caribbean. And I don't tell a lot of people that because I don't want to, I don't want a lot of people to go here. But it's hard anyway, so go ahead. San Andres, on the one hand, is pretty easy to get to. There's cheap flights from every city in Colombia. It's a very popular tourist destination for Colombians. It's very developed. You've got all-inclusive resorts. You've got private beaches. You've got the strip where you can go watch the sunset, and there's people walking around all over the place. Very crowded. Compare it to like a Cancun sort of thing, I guess. Providencia is the exact opposite. It's very small. Not a lot of people, not a lot of tourists go there. If you're not from the island, you can't own property. I don't think you can even live there unless you're from the island or married to someone from the island. And it's very small. We putted around that thing on a golf cart in about an hour. But oh my God, it's incredible. I think both of these places were originally English, like Creole speaking. It's a major, well, Providencia specifically is still mostly a Black population. I think at one point it was English sort of territory, and they had like a slave situation going on, and then the English people bailed and left behind a lot of the slave folks, and they started their own thing, and a lot of them are still there speaking this Creole mix. San Andres, I think, because of the development from the mainland, is a lot more Spanish speaking and a lot more mestizo now. This is a pic from one of the beaches. This isn't one of the touristy beaches, but like a fisherman's sort of beach in San Andres, actually, on our way to the like main strip. These are a bunch of fishermen that were just finished up for the day. I think this was 10 or 11 in the morning. They were all hanging out playing dominoes, smoking cigars and stuff. And then this is a beach. This is one of the touristy beaches in Providencia. I think in our time there, we were there for 3, 4, or 5 days, something like that. And I would say we saw a grand total of maybe 40 other Western tourists. Oh, I should mention how to get there. So from San Andres, you have to fly to from Bogotá. And then you have to take either a small Cessna plane to Providencia, which is like a 15-20 minute flight, or you can take the ferry, which takes like 4 hours. And I hear like everybody who takes it throws up. I don't remember exactly how much the plane cost. It wasn't like super cheap, but it wasn't crazy. I think the round trip was like 150. Which is a lot for a 15-minute flight, but hey. This is the peak on the island. You can hike to in like an hour and a half, 2 hours. A guide is compulsory, and they'll teach you about the plants and the animals along the way. There's tons of cool lizards and snakes and stuff that you see, and then lots of spices. I think we saw like cinnamon and black pepper and a bunch of different cool stuff just growing naturally on the side of the trail. Well, maybe they planted them there for the tourist effect. I don't know. But you can also see in the background here the coral reef. I think this is the third largest barrier reef in America. No, in the world, maybe. I think it's the Great Barrier Reef, and then the Mesoamerican Reef in Belize, in Mexico, Belize, Honduras. And then I think this is the third, this like San Andres Providencia. I could be wrong. Ignore me if I am. Okay, so that's it for the regions. I'll try to go through food quite a bit because I know we're coming up on my like soft limit. But this is bandeja paisa. This is sort of like the big jokey Colombian lunch. Colombians eat a big lunch and a small dinner. And this is typically from Medellin, but it's all over the place. But it's a huge, like, hearty lunch plate with rice, beans, avocado, egg, chicharron. That's a big old plantain, sausage, ground beef, and then a little teeny arepa, which is like a corn cake. They eat hot chocolate and sometimes coffee with cheese. It's like a salty, like neutral cheese. It's not like a creamy, not like putting cheddar in your coffee. It's like this, you throw a little chunk of the cheese down in the coffee, let it melt a bit, and then it becomes this coffee flavored cheese. They're wild about their soups. This is a calillo, I think, de res. I forget. It's like a hunk of potato and a big hunk of meat. And there's every city has its different soup, and they all think they're better than each other. They're all great. I like them all. Of course, on the coast, you'll get seafood. This was in Providencia. There's a huge fish with rice, shrimps, tomato. There's two fish there. There's a lobster in the middle if you see it, and then French fries. I think this thing costs like $12 total. It fed the both of us more than we would ever need. And then I mentioned arepas briefly, but oh my God, they love their arepas. The arepas are usually when you cook them at home, they would just be like just a plain corn cake sort of thing, maybe with some melted cheese on top. But in a lot of places, they'll stuff in them. In Venezuela, they go crazy and stuff a bunch of stuff in them. This guy in Cartagena, he stuffed it with cheese and butter, and this was just incredible. All right, fly through some costs here. I mentioned airfare can get pretty cheap if you're doing things right. Most domestic flights are pretty cheap, and Colombia has a cheap, a couple, like, what are they called? Budget airlines. So if you're traveling with a backpack or something, you can zip around for next to nothing. US passports do not require a visa. You just show up, get stamped. I forget how many days you get, 90 or 30 maybe. I haven't been there for more than 30 days, so I've never had to remember that. Depending on where you are, obviously it's a big thing, but double room at a standard hotel could cost anywhere from 40 to 100. You could get hostels for much cheaper, or if you're in a place with fancy hotels, go wild. You can get lunch or dinner if you just get like the house special for $2 or $3, really, like a very plain meal. If you're going to sort of like a Western caliber restaurant, I guess a typical, like a burger and fries or something would probably be like 10, $15. So, and then beers, again, depending on where you are. If you're getting it out of a cooler from some guy on the corner, he'll probably sell it to you for $1. If you're going to a fancy bar, you could probably get an Aguila or something like a domestic beer for $3. They have craft beers and stuff too. It's all similar. All right, safety, generally speaking, I would say yes, Colombia is very, very safe for tourists now. Like, forget the reputation. If you're planning to go there and you're on the fence because of safety, you can forget about that component. There is a lot of nuance we discussed in this realm though. Like, think about it in terms of Chicago. Like, is Chicago safe for tourists? Yeah. Is Chicago a safe city? Like, yeah, it depends where you are. But if you're a tourist, you're not going to wander into the unsafe places by accident. At least I should hope you don't. And you're probably going to have something, something in terms of an itinerary. You're going to know where you're going. You might have a guide. You're not going to get in trouble. The thing you'd have to worry about is, like, if you're in La Candelaria in Bogotá and you're walking around after dark by yourself, like, don't do that. Or if you're going to do it, just like, don't also be drunk and stay on alert. Like, I walked around at night in La Candelaria and been totally fine. But if you're unlucky, you're unlucky. But you don't have to take that sort of risk, and it's easy to circumvent. There are certain parts of the country that you don't want to go to at all, but I didn't cover any of those today, so don't worry about that unless you're going somewhere, super specialized. You're not going to run into the guerrillas or the paramilitaries or anything like that. COVID too is also a big concern. They've been in and out of waves. You can still go there right now. If you're vaccinated, I mean, I'm in the camp that says if you're vaccinated, you're safe. So I would go there confidently right now. I did go this past winter, and at the time they didn't require a test or anything. I think they still don't, but they might need a negative test now. Just, look into that. The biggest issue will be restaurants and stuff, closures, like indoor capacity limits, things like that. We're all pretty used to knowing how those function. The difference there, I guess it's not much of a difference, but they do it at the municipal level. And sometimes they do it without a lot of warning. So you'll be in Bogota, and then all of a sudden they'll say, hey, starting tomorrow for the next week, you can't eat at restaurants, and also no liquor is being sold at all anywhere. And it might happen very suddenly. So just, be aware that that's a possibility. I don't think it's a strong possibility that it's not going to happen to you on your trip necessarily, but I mean, if you're going there to party, maybe just be aware of that fact. Okay, so that concludes the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now just so I can see Julie or other people, or however that works.
Thank you so much, Derek. That was great. So we do have some questions from our audience, and I want to encourage anybody who still has a lingering question to put that in the Q&A section. If that's a trouble or a bother, you can just put it in the chat as well. But let's get started with our questions. The first question we have here is, what do you make of the alleged involvement of Colombian mercenaries in the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, president of Haiti?
Great question. Wow, right out the gate too. What do I make of it? I mean, to be honest, it's not surprising. I mean, Colombia is by a certain metric, the 51st state of the United States. It's very much been sort of the launching pad for U.S. military incursions in Latin America. The government has always been pretty subservient, at least since 1948, when Gaitán was assassinated. The government's been pretty subservient to U.S. interests in the region. I mean, the paramilitaries and stuff. I don't want to get into that. I'm just saying it's not surprising. And a lot of those Colombian military members were trained at the School of the Americas in the United States to carry out US interests. So no, I mean, when that happened, was I expecting them to say it was Colombians? No, but when they said that, it wasn't exactly surprising, because Colombia and US are big time allies. And I should say that the U.S. probably has a vested interest in Moise was becoming too unstable. I mean, he was a puppet for a while, but that only works for the U.S. government up to a certain point of instability, and he was right on that cusp, I guess. Okay, I'll stop there. Sorry.
No worries at all. You mentioned being in Colombia multiple times. Are you doing research there, or just like traveling there?
I'm going there. So I don't like to necessarily mention this, but my wife is Colombian. So usually when we go there, we'll spend a few days visiting family, and then we'll go off on our own into one of these regions that we've that I showcased here. So typically when I'm going there, I have been there for research one or two of the times I listed, but we tend to go there almost every year, or I think we've averaged in our relationship once every year and a half we've gone. So yeah, most of the time I go there, it's for tourism, just for fun.
You talked about the area in Pacifico where people who had escaped slavery would go. Were these enslaved people from Brazilian plantations in the 1700s or from other parts of South America?
Colombia had slavery. Cartagena was a big slave port as well. You'll see it's the same on the Caribbean coast, I failed to mention, but there's a strong Afro-Colombian population there as well. And there are maroon villages just inland from the coast that still have like sort of their own language and culture. And there'll be statues and things dedicated to like escaping the bondage of slavery and stuff like that. So there was a slave trade that was centered in Colombia itself.
Do people hunt and eat the capybaras?
Capybara, that's the word. I don't know, actually. I'm sure that they probably told me this when I was there. I was in the Amazon in 2015, so I forgot a lot of the stuff that like the Takuna folks told me in my, in my guided tour around the Amazon. They probably told me, I just don't remember. I would assume so. I mean, they look pretty meaty and they eat plants, so they're probably, pretty good to eat.
Are there areas that rely on narco tourism or seeing complexes of the drug cartel?
Yeah, so in Medellin, you can do like Pablo Escobar sort of tours. You can visit his compound. There's like, you can go paintballing in the Pablo Escobar compound. Um, I'm not going to judge anyone who does it because, it's a thing. I wouldn't promote it though. Again, like the city and the country as a whole is trying to shed itself of that reputation. And I think that only adds to it. In addition to that, like a lot of the people who make money from it were and are still involved in the drug trade. So I don't like the idea of like Popeye, that I think he's dead now, but like one of Pablo Escobar's right-hand men, like making a bunch of money on his legacy of like carrying out fascistic violence and assassinations on the countryside. Like I don't think that's cool. But yeah, I mean, if that's your thing and you want to do it, there's especially in Medellin, you can go on Pablo Escobar tours.
And for right now, unless anybody else has another question they want to throw in the chat or in the Q&A section, we are at our last question. Where do you find the local tourist guides for your trips?
Yeah, that's a bit complicated because I think the answer is just I spend a lot of time like Googling stuff. Basically, I read everything I can. Like, for example, when I was going to El Cocuy, El Cocuy is not necessarily a great example because it's so small and there's not that many options. But I would Google, for example, El Cocuy hiking blog, right? And the whole front page of Google will have blogs, and you can read them, and you'll be able to discern the quality of the blog, or if the blogger themselves is like on the same page as what you want to get out of it. And a lot of times they'll mention the outfit they went with, the guide or the agency or whatever. And if it all sounds good to me, I'll contact them, and then I just sort of make a judgment call based on their response time and whatever. Yo Eco Tours, for example, in the Amazon. I mean, I don't remember specifically how I found them, but if I was looking for the similar thing today, I would probably start by Googling like locally owned ecotourism, Leticia, Amazon, Colombia. That being said, none of those words actually are like legally defined by anything, right? So you have to like really do some digging. Like locally owned, like those huge mega hotels that I talked about, those are locally owned, right? So that's not necessarily a good thing. Ecotourism isn't defined, so that's not necessarily a good thing. You can't just because it has the word eco doesn't mean it's not like displacing indigenous people or churning out like pollution. It might just mean they recycle. Like there's no definition at all. But that's a starting point. If you Google that, you look at TripAdvisor reviews, learn how to discern the fake ones from the real ones. I mean, again, look at blogs, search on YouTube. Even like Instagram, if you look up the place, I wouldn't necessarily trust the Instagram account of the lodge, right? But if you look at the geotag of the lodge, you can see the types of people that are spending their time there, what they've said. Maybe there's a hashtag associated with it. There's no simple answer really. But I try to do my best. And I know along the way, I mean, you're going to make mistakes because some places don't have a good ethical option, if that word means anything. And some places you think you got it figured out. And then when you get there, you realize like, oh, this place is, doing bad stuff too. But the best you can do is learn and then report back.
Yeah. It sounds like you're really thorough in your research when looking for guides. So, but yeah, thank you so much, Derek, for answering those questions. That will conclude our travelogue presentation today. Thank you so much for attending and for supporting the work of the Geographic Society of Chicago.